Hello, everyone. As someone who's part of the LGBT community, I've often heard of Stonewall, especially during Pride Month in June, and I'm always wondering what it was about. Because I know Stonewall obviously was one of those things in LGBT history that you just have to know, but I often didn't really find anybody talking about it in detail. So, what actually happened is during the 1950s to 1970s, there were frequent raids on bars by the New York State Liquor Authority. The LGBTQ community was illegal in every state except for Illinois, and a law allowed them to be outed by the media without permission. And as a result, many people were disowned, they were fired from their jobs, and they were targeted by other civilians. In 1966, the Genovese family bought Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village, New York City. It allowed drag queens, homeless gays, and something that other bars didn't allow, which was dancing, which is interesting to me that most gay bars didn't allow dancing. And so the Stonewall Inn was actually raided on average, one time per month. The police would come in and raid because they didn't have a liquor license. And they were actually rated the same week. They were rated June 24th, and then subsequently on June 27th, the same day of the Stonewall riots. It was also the same day as Judy Garland's funeral, which most people were upset about. So what was different about this one was the mafia were not informed of the raid. Usually they had insiders in with the cops who would tell them beforehand, this is what they're planning to do, this is when they're going to raid, and they weren't informed on June 27th. So they were really surprised, and June 28th at 3 a.m. it turned violent. People without IDs were held inside by the cops. 150 to 200 people fled, regrouped, and decided they were going to swarm the bar. And so the initial first person to be kind of taken into custody was Stormy DeLavery. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. She punched a cop to escape their cop car and yelled to the crowd, "Why don't you guys do something?" And people were kind of shocked because they hadn't thought about it. But when she kind of triggered the crowd, I guess, they started throwing pennies, bottles, and cobblestone at the cops, and it turned into a more violent riot. And people were trying to, get the cops to leave them alone. They were tired of being targeted. It was hard for LGBTQ people in the day. Stormy was actually a cross-dresser. She was the media called her a butch lesbian. She was someone who was very active in the community, and later on she would actually go around patrolling Greenwich Village with a gun to protect her, what she called baby gays, which I think is really cute. Anyways, the uproar caused the police to get scared, and they ended up barricading themselves inside of the bar, which is a little backwards to me, if you ask me, because I feel like you should barricade the other people inside the bar, but I don't know. They decided to put themselves inside the bar. And so the riot continued outside. People tore a parking meter out of the ground and used it to actually get back inside the bar. And they threw a firebomb at the cops, which prompted them to call the fire department. An officer at one point threw their gun at the mob. I don't know why. Windows were smashed. Drag queens hit cops with their purses. There were cheerleaders and Rockette-style kicking lines. It was beautiful chaos. And in about 45 minutes to 2 hours, the fire and the riot were quelled for the night. But it did have a lasting impact on a lot of people in the area, a lot of the homeless gays and drag queens who frequented the bar. They were all just very upset by the raid, and they were beginning to grow tired of it. Despite the number of people there that night, only a total of 13 arrests were made. Many people who were put in cop cars escaped since they were so cramped, so only 13 actually got arrested. Among them was David Van Ronk, who was blamed with the assault of an officer and injured his right eye through the window, and the cops actually dragged him inside the bar and beat him until he passed out and they could put him in the car. There was also Wolfgang Podolsky. He struck an officer in the left eye with a rolled newspaper, and the officer fell to the floor and fractured his wrist, and Wolfgang was blamed with this. There was also an unnamed guy who struggled with an officer after not complying, and then Thomas Staton, who threw objects at an officer trying to arrest someone. And then they have Raymond Castro, who is in this picture here. He was handcuffed by two officers, and he pushed back on the running board on the way to the cop car, which is that little thing that helps them step into the vehicle. And he knocked back two officers, and it really energized the crowd, and it got them to keep going with the riot and to get a little bit rowdier. And Raymond Castro didn't stop there. Along with Marilyn Fowler and Vincent de Paul, they also worked together to shove and kick an officer. The next couple days, the media had mixed reviews on what they had to say about the riots. For the side of the gays, a lot of people were in favor. You have people like Dick Leash, who wrote Hairpin Drop Heard Around the World. He was actually the first gay journalist to report it. And then you have Howard Smith, who wrote Full Moon Over the Stonewall. He was actually inside of the bar with the cops when they barricaded themselves in, so he got to see all the cops freak out. There was another one about Queen Power and how drag queens helped a lot in the riots and how it was important to them. And the Village Voice also gave two first-hand accounts and interviews with both protesters and police, and gave it front page coverage. But most mainstream media, like the New York Times, all that sort of stuff, was more straight-leaning, so it didn't give gay people as much attention. After the night of the riot, the next day they came back to find the machines had been raided. It looked like the police had stolen all the money from their machines, and a protest outside started. People were shouting gay power, we want freedom now, and equality for homosexuals. And eventually the mob grows, and it's not only gay people in the mob anymore. Now it is many straight people as well. So there was an unintentional roadblock that started as they kind of grew out more towards the streets as the mob grew. And a bus driver who got stuck in the roadblock disapproved, and they decided to retaliate by making an intentional roadblock. And so for hours they had this unintentional roadblock become intentional. And it actually prompted the 5th, 6th, 9th, and 4th precinct cops to join and instigate protesters using nightsticks, which are like batons. And actually they weren't enough to quell the police force, so a tactical police force joined, and they arrived and started beating up a kid, and the crowd shielded the boy, and it kind of like dismissed to the media that all gays were weak and cowardly. So the cops kind of gave up. They attempted to, instead of quelling the riot, they decided to clear Greenwich Village. So they tried to push them out of Christopher Street to 10th Street and 6th Avenue. But the protesters circled back around, and I think that is just hilarious. The cops eventually forced them out of Christopher Street, but they were just so smart to just go around. Like, come on, man. So obviously Stonewall had a lot of impacts, especially today when we talk about it so much. They formed the Gay Liberation Front, which was a more extreme version of the pre-existing Mattachine Society. And they used the motto, "Say it loud, gay is proud." And they actually organized the first Pride Parade as we know it today. On June 28th, 1970, the next year after the Stonewall riot to the day, they organized Christopher Street Liberation Day. And that tradition has continued in what we know as Pride Parade. And I think that's just so cool that, like, one bar raid out of the millions turned into this wonderful thing in this month that we now celebrate as, you know, part of ourselves and part of our culture and our history. And I'm just so glad that the people at Stonewall were brave enough to fight back. Let me know what you guys think.